anyone who's like done any photography is it's pretty obvious that it's just AI slop. And I think that's the frustration that a lot of photographers are having is that their work is being overshadowed by these AI creations. I think that's where a lot of the frustration lies. And I applaud Adobe for trying to think outside the box in terms of how do you authenticate whether or not something is using AI or not.
Yeah. I mean, there's just a huge difference for the artist, but also for the audience between, you know, using the photo in your background. There's a big difference of did this person climb this mountain and take
Right.
this photo? Like, was this real? Is that really a place? That matters to definitely the artist, but also to the end user of like, is this just AI or is that a real place? Everybody wants to know that, and everybody is second guessing.
Hey everyone, I'm Matt Payne, and this is episode 459 of F-Stop, Collaborate, and Listen. This week, I'm joined by Adobe's Senior Product Manager for Photoshop, Steven Nielsen. We dig into one of the biggest conversations in photography right now, AI. Not the hype, not the panic, but what it actually looks like to build tools that support creative intent instead of replacing it. We talk about how photographers' workflows are changing, how Adobe thinks about authenticity and realism, where human craft still matters most, and how to approach new tools without feeling overwhelmed or left behind. If you've been curious, cautious, or conflicted about AI in photography, this is a thoughtful, grounded conversation that you won't want to miss. All right, let's dive into my conversation with Steven Nielsen. All right, Steven Nielsen, it's great to have you on the podcast.
Thanks, Matt. I'm happy to be here.
Awesome, man. I've been looking forward to having a conversation with someone from Adobe for a very, very long time. So I'm super excited for this one. So maybe to kick us off, tell us who you are and what your role is at Adobe, and maybe what does it mean to guide the future of Photoshop in this era of rapid technological change?
Yeah. So my role at Adobe is I'm the Senior Director of Product Management for Photoshop. I've been on the team now for 15 years. And, as a product manager, our job is to, really understand what customers do, what they need, and using our understanding of, how customers use our product, figure out what are we going to build next? What are we going to prioritize? And then we work really closely with the engineers and the designers to actually build that and put it out into Photoshop. So it's been an amazing experience, a very humbling experience to work on such a consequential and beloved product like Photoshop. The thing that has really inspired me, it has always been the customer work. I just love seeing what people create in Photoshop. There's so many creative people. I don't really consider myself that creative. I'm a photographer, but I'm not particularly accomplished. But I just really, really appreciate the work that people do in our product, and I'm so glad and happy to be part of enabling that. The last, 4 or 5 years have been really, really interesting as AI has rapidly improved in its capabilities. We've been working with AI for, gosh, probably 10 years.
Hmm.
But the last few years have really accelerated in terms of what AI is capable of doing. And it's really unlocking a lot of opportunities that we didn't have before and allowing us to do things that we just couldn't be done. So I also understand why people have a lot of anxiety around AI. It is disruptive. It does change a lot of things. So we're trying to be responsible in the way that we integrate AI into the product and do it in a way that really supports human creativity.
Hmm.
At the end of the day, that's what Adobe's all about is, the creative community and creative people by giving them tools. And I think AI is, in many respects, just another tool. It's a very powerful tool.
Yes.
It's the most powerful tool that we've ever seen, but it is just a tool, and it can be used for good and bad, and it is something that we need to figure out how to leverage and use to enable our customers in their creative journeys.
Yeah, I recently had a couple of photographers on my podcast who used to be pretty straight, like they do a lot of product and commercial work. And they've recently been dabbling with AI mostly because their customers will come to them with these ideas. And before AI, they're like, it's not really possible for me to make you look
Yeah,
like you're on fire without me applying all of this oil on you and hoping we don't have to take you to the hospital. And through AI, they've been able to create some really interesting imagery. But I'm with you. Like, I understand a lot of the anxiety that a lot of photographers and creatives have around AI technology, especially as it comes to image generation and authenticity. And a lot of people worried about, losing their jobs and there's a lot of fear that comes with AI, but I think there's a lot of cool stuff you can do with it as well. I'd be curious, maybe we could talk a little bit about that anxiety in the photography world around AI potentially replacing the artistic decision making process. I know from Adobe's perspective, AI is exciting, but what does it look like to build AI that elevates the photographer rather than replace them altogether?
yeah. I think Photoshop has always been about giving customers choice, giving you uh, access to all of these tools. We can disagree, or not you and I, but like people can disagree on whether those tools are used for good or bad, even before AI. But our goal is really to just provide tools and give users choice, and as much as possible, give transparency too. And this is, we'll probably talk about this a little bit later, but I think Adobe is doing some really interesting work in transparency on when AI is used and when AI is not used, that is really kind of nascent in the industry and really kind of missing. And I think as we make more progress there, I think that will alleviate a lot of the anxiety that people have, because so many people, whether they're creatives or consumers, just the general public, they don't know what's real. And that's part of the biggest, anxiety about AI is just, I don't know if I can trust this.
Mm-hmm.
And we are investing a lot in helping to solve that problem. That issue aside, assuming we can fix that, I think the rest of the opportunity is figuring out how do we just give the users more choice, to give them more tools to create what they want to create. As long as we do that in a transparent way, I think that allows the individual artist to choose, am I going to use this tool, or am I going to not use that tool, or am I going to use that tool instead?
It's an interesting conversation to be had because, from my perspective, and a lot of the conversations I've been having with other creatives, is that the frustration lies with the platforms where people are sharing the AI. Let's just call it slop. I don't think you're going to create a lot of slop in Photoshop, but there's a lot of slop that's being created in Midjourney and things of that nature. And it's getting shared by these huge kind of like foreign aggregate, like Facebook pages that have no face or name to them. And they're leveraging like National Geographic in their title so that people have this belief that it's real photography. And there's like lots and lots of people out there that are resharing the work because they think it's amazing. And anyone who's like done any photography it's pretty obvious that it's just AI slop. And I think that's the frustration that a lot of photographers are having, is that their work is being overshadowed by these AI creations, and it's kind of these nefarious platform rules that exist or don't exist in terms of like Instagram, Facebook, X, Threads, like not properly showing the users that this is not something that was actually created with a camera. And I think that's where a lot of the frustration lies. And so I applaud Adobe for trying to think outside the box in terms of how do you authenticate whether or not something is using AI or not.
Yeah. I mean, there's just a huge difference for the artist, but also for the audience between, using it, the photo in your background. There's a big difference of did this person climb this mountain and
Right.
take this photo? Like, was this real? Is that really a place? That matters to definitely the artist, but also to the end user of like, is this just AI or is that a real place? Everybody wants to know that, and everybody is second guessing. Well, not everybody. Most people are second guessing what they see on the internet. Many people are being duped by it, but and so there's a collective anxiety right now. Like, gosh, you couldn't trust the internet before. Now you really can't trust. You used to be able to trust images. You used to be able to trust like a video of like this is tangible, real proof of something. Now people don't know what to believe because it's so easy to fake this. And like you said, right now, if you're very familiar with AI content, you can often pick out what's AI and what's not. But the technology is getting so good that it is getting harder and harder and will soon be probably impossible to determine just by visually looking at it, is this real or not?
Yes.
And we're getting really close to that point, maybe even past that point in some cases. I'm having a harder time
Yeah. Yeah.
determining what's real and what's not with some of the newest models. But that's where I feel like we need other tools for creatives and for audiences and consumers to be able to determine what is real because it's
Yeah.
important. It's important what is real. It's important how something was created. I was going to mention this later, but there's a article that I read in the New Yorker by an author named Ted Chiang that I loved, where he makes the argument of why AI is never going to make art. And so, there's a very philosophical discussion about what is art. He's a artist, an author, and his argument is that art is something that results from making a lot of choices.
Hmm.
Art is what happens when a human makes a bunch of sequential choices to create something. And I think his argument is that AI can be part of that. Like, you can choose to use AI in a lot of different ways. But the point where, somebody just types in like a 10-word prompt to generate something, that's not a lot of choices.
Right.
You chose 10 words, whereas, and he gives an example of somebody who spent hours and hours, days, generating 10,000 images and then bringing them all together. And like that person, even though they were using AI, made a lot of choices, human choices, where they combined a lot of their choices into a final piece of art. And even though it used AI, according to his definition, that's art. I think that we saw some similar critiques of photography when it first came out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Prior to photography, people made lots of choices by painting with a paintbrush. Millions of choices. Which paint am I going to use? What color? How am I going to mix these together? How am I going to apply the brush? Which brush am I going to use? And then photography came along and it looked like I just, you know, squeeze a little thing or push a little button and boom, that's all you did. That's not art. And this was a debate back then of like, is photography art? And maybe in the early days it wasn't, but certainly over time, professional photographers have now discovered there are so many choices to be made in how you frame a shot, which film you use, which settings you use on your camera, which exposure, and how you arrange people or whatever. There's so many choices that go into photography today that maybe were not very apparent in the early days of photography, but we've discovered ways to choose and create art out of this new medium. I think the same will be true of AI. And while there's plenty of photography that doesn't classify as art, me taking a photo of a receipt, is certainly not art. I didn't make many choices in that. There's a lot of AI that is not art. I think there will be some AI that is art. I don't know what that will look like, to be honest, but I think that we will find creative humans will find interesting ways to use AI and to imbue lots of choices into their process and create art.
Yeah, I don't disagree with any of that. And I think the biggest problem in the AI debate is the lack of nuance and the proliferation of black and white thinking that exists, especially in social media land where people just want things to be simple, yes, no, good, bad, that kind of a thing. And I was in an argument just the other day with someone who was like making the case that all digital cameras are AI and therefore they are bad. And I was just like, I don't understand how you can make that argument and put that into the same bucket as someone who is typing in a prompt like you were describing and then putting that onto Facebook and claiming it as their artistic creation. Like, what are we talking about here? Like, these are two very different things that are occurring. Yes, some modern cameras are using AI algorithms to help you with focusing and things of that nature. But like, we can't put everything into the exact same bucket and call it bad. I think
Yeah,
a nuanced conversation is needed in terms of what is acceptable or not. And it comes down to the individual as well. Like, I'm pretty comfortable using AI to remove dust spots. You know what I mean? Like, I'm
exactly,
actually, when
exactly.
Lightroom just released that feature a couple weeks ago, I was like, that has been needed for about a decade. Thank you very much. Maybe some AI keywording. That would be really nice to have as well. But like, having a prompt where I can add a rainbow and a unicorn into my photograph, maybe not something I'm going to use, but someone else might find value in that in their creative process. I think one thing I really wanted to ask you about that comes up over and over again in conversations I have with other creatives, and a big part of this is a large part of my audience values that realism and authenticity that we were talking about. At Adobe, I'm curious, how do you design tools that are powerful and efficient without undermining genres like documentary, nature, and landscape photography?
Yeah, we're trying to provide as many tools as we can for customers. Photoshop is a professional tool, and it is all about just providing the best tools possible. We serve a lot of different customer types with Photoshop, all the way from painters and illustrators to wedding photographers to Nat Geo photographers to 3D artists. It's an incredibly broad spectrum of customers who use Photoshop because it has the best tools. What we found is that there's a lot of use cases for AI. What seems to resonate the most with customers is AI that helps the editing process. So even though we have features in Photoshop where you can generate a whole image using AI, there's not that many people that do that. What we find is way more useful is, hey, I want to use the power of AI, this amazing tool, to do something like, fill a hole, or remove something from an image. Like generative fill is still one of our most popular features because
Yeah.
it is like such a great use case. It's so common. It was difficult to get right before, and most people when we released generative fill were like, "This is amazing." We didn't really hear a lot of angst or anxiety around generative fill when it first launched. It was just pure amazement
Right.
and gratitude of like, oh my gosh, thank you, this is so cool. As we move into more generation capabilities where it's actually creating more art, or no, I shouldn't say art, but creating more content, that's where customers seem to get a little more uneasy
Hmm.
about AI. But like you said, AI for removing dust. Yes, please, more of that
Amazing.
times 100. Like I want more, 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 more. I I remember seeing somebody on a social media platform say something like, "I want AI to do my laundry and do the dishes so that I can spend more time being creative.
Right.
I don't want AI to be creative so that I am left just doing the laundry and dishes. Like, so do the metaphorical laundry and cleaning the bathroom, like the
Right.
stuff that I don't like doing.
Right.
Like
Like
automate that stuff."
keywording images. Like, I don't know anyone who
Yes,
enjoys keywording their images.
exactly. And it's not a creative process. It's not fulfilling and exciting, and like there's not much vision to it. So we want to build AI tools that enable and enable humans to focus more on the parts that they want to focus on.
Yeah.
AI that helps you be productive, increases your, it reduces drudgery. AI that can speed up your process and allow you to spend more time on being creative.
Yeah. No, I'm all in on that, man. And I know I've gotten some flack from listeners because I'm a pretty early adopter of certain AI tools to do exactly what you're describing in terms of making some of those tasks that are mindless and just time consuming easier. But I also think there's a danger in like letting AI do all the heavy lifting for you, where I see people slip into like they have AI just writing all of their emails for them and stuff like that, and you start to lose personal touch and like who you are as an individual when you start letting AI do everything for you. But I think it has there's use cases for it. I mean, I can give you one example from myself that I recently used it for. I'm getting ready to publish a book, and I was working with my book publisher on the cover, and my cover image doesn't exactly fit the size book that I'm using. In order for the image to wrap around the edges and be glued correctly to the inside of the cover of the book, I needed more image. And I could either pick a different photograph, stretch the image, or in my case, what it did is I used AI to just generate more on the top and the bottom, which was just like sky and
Yeah.
some like water, and let that wrap around the edge of my book cover, and it looks clean and seamless, and it pretty much saved the book cover. So, and I was completely fine with AI doing that task. You know what I mean? So I
Yeah.
think it's nuanced.
Well, for sure, because I mean, what you did could have been done previously.
Sure.
You could use the clone stamp tool, or you could, especially if it's a sky with not much of a gradient, you could just fill with a color or fill with a gradient, and like
Exactly.
you know, an artist could spend a bunch of time that they probably wouldn't enjoy creating exactly that, and AI accelerated it.
Exactly.
Is that an appropriate use of AI? I think so. I understand why people would maybe have differing opinions on it, but I think that would be great. Like, I think that's a very positive use of AI. I think one of the things that, like I said, people are looking for is the transparency angle is not yet solved.
Hmm.
So, using that analogy of going from painting to photography, it was really obvious back then what was a painting and what was a photograph. Like there was
Right.
no mistaking people. So a viewer of both types of content it could immediately discern that is a painting and that is a photograph. One of the challenges that we're having right now is that AI is a sort of a new medium, and it's really, really difficult to discern, is that a photograph or is that AI? And that is not like we talked about, is becoming much, much more difficult to discern. And this is where I think we need new tools
Hmm.
to be able to determine what's AI and what is not AI. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the content authenticity initiative
I am.
from Adobe, but this is where I feel like Adobe is doing some groundbreaking work that nobody else in the industry is doing. Or I should say, we have many partners on this, but Adobe is really leading the way on using technology to help in that transparency, um, discernment. One of the things that I'm excited about right now, the CAI technology is still kind of in its infancy, and I'm really excited about some of the future direction that it can go. Right now, most attempts have about AI have been, or in tagging AI, have been around, if AI was used, put a tag on it, a digital watermark that a AI or that a social media platform can read. And some of your users or listeners may have encountered this. We started putting a tag on any AI content in Photoshop, and some of our some of the popular social media platforms, including Instagram, read that tag and started labeling content as AI generated. And that really surprised and freaked a lot of people out there. this was not AI generated. I just used generative fill to like fill a small little spot or remove a dust spot, and Instagram is saying this is AI generated.
Right.
So there's a series of miscommunications in that. So we rolled that back and stopped tagging that. What I think we have the opportunity to do now is, instead of tagging when AI was used, which we're in the midst of improving, I think we have the opportunity to prove when AI was not used.
Mm.
And we're actually already doing this with our drawing app, Fresco. If you use Adobe Fresco to draw something by hand, we can certify and prove that no AI was used in this, that this was completely hand drawn by a human. And we can embed this digital watermark in that image, JPEG, PNG, whatever, so that you can send it to somebody and say, like, this has a digital signature. I can prove this was created exclusively by a human and no AI was used. It's a very powerful capability. And I think artists are going to love that capability. We've already heard from like art schools saying, oh my gosh, we need this. Like,
Yeah.
because how do we evaluate somebody's portfolio? We don't know. Did they just generate this AI? No, you need a tool like this to certify this thing was hand created by a human. Likewise, I think we can do the same thing with a camera. Certify this image was taken by X camera and it was not modified beyond a certain range.
Yeah.
Probably allow for color adjustments and that sort of thing, so that when you publish it, users can say, like, this has a certified digital signature on it. I can trust this thing. And then on the far end, I think there's also the opportunity to say, hey, this thing is AI generated. Like that's great. Like there's nothing wrong with that, but we need to be able to discern between the something that's taken from a camera or drawn by hand and what's generated by AI. And that's exactly what content authenticity, I think, is going to enable us to do.
Well, I love that. I actually run an international landscape and nature photography competition where we don't allow certain types of editing in Photoshop and we don't allow the use of any AI image generation and things of that nature. And our process for that is that we actually request every single raw file once an image makes it past a certain point in the competition, and we get 12,000 images submitted every year. So we're going through a lot of raw files in Lightroom and kind
Yeah,
of flipping between the JPEG they submit and the raw file to see kind of how they match up or don't. And having that little digital watermark would save us a ton of time.
exactly. And that is a great example of not fun, boring, drudgery work,
Right.
I imagine, and also underappreciated by a viewer. Somebody sees the results of that photography contest. They don't, unless they are very familiar with their process, they don't know.
Right.
They might just see this on the result on Instagram, like, that's probably fake. Actually, it's not. you know, and proving that is very, very challenging without a technological solution like CAI. With CAI, though, everybody can gain confidence that this thing is real, this thing is AI generated, and that's okay. My background here is AI generated. It doesn't matter. Like, it's just a silly, fun thing that I did. I actually took a photo and generated some different backgrounds for the weather. It's rainy here in Seattle, so I made a rainy background. That's totally inconsequential. Doesn't matter. AI is great for and fun for stuff like that. But when it matters, customers are going to want to know. Consumers and the general public are going to want to know: is this real? Is this a real photo, or is this AI generated?
Yeah, I think we're talking about the economy of trust. And I actually read a really fascinating article in Petapixel this week where they talked about apparently back in like 1912, President Taft wanted Congress to pass a law that made it illegal to modify photographs because cartoonists and stuff were taking images of the president and like altering them, and he didn't like it. And a couple of Congress people also were having that happen to them, and they didn't appreciate images of them being manipulated and modified. And it was fascinating to hear that the pushback was from the photographers and photography industry, that they didn't want that level of regulation and nuance on their industry because they felt like it would squander their creativity. And I think this is something we've dealt with ever since Photoshop was incepted. I mean, we
Yeah.
saw it with Art Wolf in one of his books, Migrations, where he stamped a bunch of birds on the cover of his book and took a lot of heat for it back in like 97 or whatever it was. So at least he was clear though in his, like in the description of the image, he said, this is what I did and why I did it. I think so much of
Yeah.
the problem right now is that people are doing these things to their images without disclosing to their audience that it doesn't represent quote unquote reality or represent an actual experience that they had. And the only thing the consumer is left to do is either guess, or what I recommend people do is get to know your creators a lot better and find the ones that you can actually
Absolutely.
trust, right? So the
Yeah.
onus is on you as the consumer of the digital, of photos and imagery and videos. Like, is it real or not? It's up to you. You need to do the research. And I think right now people are just too lazy for that.
Yeah. You know, you mentioned how, or you reminded me of years ago, maybe 10, 12 years ago, Adobe collaborated with the Met on an exhibit where we went through the history of photo manipulation before Photoshop.
Yeah.
And, we highlighted all these artists who, using darkroom tools, created surrealistic art
Yep.
and photo manipulation in the darkroom with, just burning and dodging and, double exposure, different contact sheets and whatever. And they created amazing work. Their tools were crude, but they were able to create manipulated photos, using traditional physical tools.
Right.
Obviously, Photoshop made that easier, but it's not the first time. I mean, there's that famous photograph of I can't remember if it's Stalin or where they actually removed somebody in an image, again using like darkroom techniques. I don't know exactly how they did it, but yeah, this was possible, difficult but possible,
Right.
pre Photoshop. Photoshop made that a lot easier, and AI is making that even more accessible and
Right.
even easier to do. And to be honest, that's not going to, we can't put that genie back in the bottle.
Right.
These tools are here to stay. Like, they are not going away. But what we can do is provide tools for transparency about when are they used and when are they not used, and what does that mean to a user. So that's what, like I said earlier, we're all about providing the best tools possible and also providing the transparency on when those tools were used.
I love that. Yeah, you were mentioning photographers who did photo manipulation in the darkroom using double exposures, and one of my favorites that comes to mind is Jerry Ilsman.
Yeah,
He passed away maybe 2 or 3 years ago now, but his photography creations were amazing, and it was all done using double exposures in the
exactly.
darkroom. And the difference there is, like, when you look at his photography, I think most people looking at it know that it's not like a straight image. Like, they were pretty wild creations that he was coming up with, but the technology existed well before digital photography came around.
Yep. Yeah,
Yeah.
Jerry was heavily featured in this exhibit
Oh
at
yeah.
the Met for exactly that reason. And like you said, like a lot of Jerry's art is kind of obviously art
Right.
because it's like very surrealistic, but it did challenge the notion of, hey, this is a photograph, but wait, like his more subtle pieces made you question whether or not it was real. The other ones, yeah, some of the more extreme ones were like, oh, that's obviously somehow manipulated. I don't know how he did it. And that's where I think there's plenty of AI where you can obviously see that it's AI because, like, there's no planet that has, you know 5 moons that we can take a photo on, or whatever.
Sure.
Um, but there's others where it's like, this is really hard to tell just by the content whether or not this is real or not.
Yeah. Yeah. I think when it comes to modern technology, I think the most frustrating thing for me and a lot of other photographers are the folks out there who are creating landscape images of nature that aren't representative of what they actually captured using compositing from different locations, adding in skies, blending in different foreground elements that didn't exist, stretching mountains, making things look super surrealistic, but they're doing it in a way that makes the viewer think that it represents a real moment and a real experience, but they never ever disclose that information to the viewer. And when they're challenged on that, they either will block you, or they will get super defensive, or they will just plain out lie to you. And I think that's where this authenticity problem, it'd be nice if that was solved for sure.
Yeah, because I mean, I think it's very realistic that somebody probably put a ton of time into that. And like I was saying earlier
Absolutely.
about art, like they made a bunch of choices. So is that art? Yeah. Like
Sure.
if you made a bunch of choices, like I think that they're I think that that qualifies as art. I think it qualifies as valuable and important. But we need transparency on when it was used and when it was not used.
Yeah.
And that's really what we're trying to help solve is just being transparent about what was used in the creation of this, and does it represent a moment of reality, which is what we've assumed photography meant for over 100 years and 150 years. We've assumed that a photograph meant this is a moment of reality, and we can't assume that anymore.
No.
We need to bring that back in a way that is transparent to customers or to consumers of viewing this content, so they know that actually does represent a moment of reality. This other thing over here is art, and you can judge it by your own qualities, and you might like it or dislike it, and that's totally subjective. But we need that transparency on to distinguish the two.
And just a point, those two things are not mutually exclusive.
Absolutely.
A straight photograph of a beautiful landscape done creatively and crafted in the field that wasn't relying upon compositing can be art just as much as a composite image is art as well. So I think there's
Absolutely.
a misnomer out there that like if you don't do a bunch of stuff to a photograph, it's not art, and I think that's a mistake.
I totally agree, and you know, we often hear like the response to kind of a derogatory response is that's AI.
Right.
Okay, what if it is?
Blanket statement, I
Like,
know.
just because something is AI doesn't mean that it's bad. Now, if it's AI pretending to be reality or pretending to not be AI, that I agree is bad. But is it bad that something is AI? I don't think it's good or bad. It's just we just need to be transparent about what it is.
Yeah, love that. I'm curious, like inside Adobe, is there a debate going on in terms of how far AI tools should go? Like, how do you balance innovation with maintaining the integrity of the photographic medium?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that there's we do have quite a few debates about where how AI should perform. We put a lot of effort into making sure that our AI that we build is not biased towards any skin tones or cultures or that sort of thing or genders. We try to make it very ethically representative. I think as far as the capabilities of the model, there are definitely some areas that we deliberately avoid. We don't have a lot of debates about them. I think they're kind of obvious. So, for example, we've had zero discussions about AI to generate raw images. And like theoretically, you could build an AI that generates a raw image and tricks people into thinking that this is more real than it is.
Mm,
That is theoretically possible.
yeah,
And maybe somebody's done it. I don't know. But Adobe certainly isn't doing it because there's no specific value there. And I think that that would be misleading to customers. Most people, if they assume, like, hey, I've got a CR2 image here, that's a Canon RAW image. If that's an NEF, okay, I know that's a RAW image straight out of an Nikon camera. And they assume that that's, to your point, more real and more authentic than just a JPEG. We're not building any AI to to generate raw images and accelerate the perception that something is real when it's actually not. But are we building AI to like manipulate things. Like, yeah, we want Photoshop in particular to have the most powerful tools. Like, if you can do it with an image, we want Photoshop to be able to do it quickly, do it powerfully, do it with high resolution, with the most control. That is absolutely our vision. We also, though, want to be transparent about what tools were used, when something was real, represents a real moment from a camera, like we talked about. So we want to provide all the best tools and the transparency to go along with it.
Love that. One of the two main debates that I hear people bring up over and over again, or criticisms of AI that I agree with to some degree, is one, the power consumption that's required in order to fuel the models and to fuel the generation of artificial things, whether they be text or image generation. And then the second being that inherently all of these models are trained on stuff that actually was created by people. And is that an ethical dilemma in terms of
Yep.
like are you stealing other people's stuff in order to create things from scratch? And so I'm curious, where does Adobe think about those two issues as it relates to the product?
Yeah, these are great questions, and I'll address both of them. The first one, as far as the energy cost of AI, this is an industry-wide challenge, and the energy needs of these data centers for creating this art and running these models and running these models is enormous. And I know up here in Seattle, we're seeing our utility prices go up as a result. Like, my electrical bill at my house is like up like 30% this year. And
Your friends are like, thanks, Stephen. We appreciate it.
so, I mean, and that's certainly not, Adobe's a very, very small portion of this,
Totally.
but the overall industry has tremendous energy demands. My personal hope is that we figure out how to leverage more renewable energy to solve this. Adobe's doing a lot to try to optimize energy costs and prefer renewable sources and the AI that we build. It's not perfect, but we're doing as much as we can to do this in a responsible way that has less impact on the world. As for the training content that goes into the model, this is again where Adobe has taken a very different position from everybody else in the industry. And I'm really proud that we have taken this approach because our approach is very creator friendly. Now, I'm not saying it's perfect, but our approach has been when we build AI, we only train that AI on content that we have a license to. We do not scrape the internet. We don't we and we've been accused in the past of like, hey, anytime you open a photo in Photoshop, Adobe is stealing your art
I
and they're looking
know.
through your hard drive. And I'm like, we absolutely are not doing those things. Like,
Yeah.
and I do get sad and frustrated sometimes because I feel like we're actually, Adobe is one of the only companies that I think is doing this in a responsible way, in a creator friendly way, because we only train our content on content that we have a license to. The majority of that comes from Adobe Stock. So when you submit your art to Adobe Stock, part of the licensing terms are we're allowed to train on your content. If you don't want it, you can remove it from Adobe Stock and we won't train on your content. But if you have submitted it to Adobe Stock, then we are allowed to train on that content and public domain content where the copyright has expired or their Creative Commons and that sort of thing. But we don't train on the internet overall. We don't train on user images. And I think that that's a really respectful approach to still building powerful tools with AI while respecting artists, copyright and and I should say we also add in a lot of filtering into if you try to generate Mickey Mouse with Adobe Firefly, it doesn't know what to do because we have specifically trained it to respect copyright and to not steal other people's work. Like generate in the style of this person. It doesn't work in Firefly by design because we are trying to respect creators' rights and their intellectual property. Again, I can't claim that we're perfect in every instance, but we are trying and we take that very, very seriously. We always want our Adobe created AI to be respectful of artists.
I love that. I don't know how this would work or even if it's possible, or maybe you're already doing it. I don't know. But you said that everything is trained off Adobe stock. I'm guessing that when Firefly is referencing that library of content, it's not always able to like attribute, like if I said, create this like sandstone view and it's like, oh, I referenced these 7 images in Adobe stock that look like that. Is there a way to tie any revenues you're able to generate through Adobe Firefly back to those Adobe stock users who've contributed that content?
Absolutely. And this is a little bit out of my technical depth, so I'll just answer generically. There is some technology that can estimate that. It's not a pure like, hey, we grabbed these pixels from that photo and that those
Right.
pixels from that photo. It's not really like that. That's not how the algorithm works. But we do have some technology that can make a crude estimation of when artwork was referenced or similarity, that sort of thing. And I believe that we have used this in our we've actually sent credits to customers, based on the content that was trained on the content that we trained on in Adobe Stock. So artists and contributors to Adobe Stock have been compensated in the past on how much their artwork is trained. I'm not an expert on the rules around that and that sort of thing, but that is something that we have done in the past and have attempted to, solve.
That's cool. All right, so I think I have one or two more questions for you. Maybe without giving away any confidential information, what general trends or future directions in Photoshop should photographers be paying attention to over the next couple of years?
Oh man. Well, there's AI has so many different use cases. This is a new disruptive technology that has so many options. The first ones have been all kind of related in a category, starting with generative fill and like, doing variations of that. I think you're going to start to see a lot of new applications of AI that go beyond that simple use case. And you're already seeing this with the harmonize feature that we just released last month. If you haven't seen that, it's a pretty amazing. You can just cut out anything and harmonize it, fix the shadows, color, blend it in, and make it look like it was part of the new background.
Hmm.
It's amazing. I think we're going to see a lot more capabilities pulled out of this AI. Um, you're going to see a lot more in terms of automation and the AI understanding what you're trying to do and doing it for you if you want, but always giving you control.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of explorations right now on what some people are calling agents, AI agents, where AI is actually doing things for you, sequential tasks, automating things, figuring out what your workflow is, and making automating that for you. There's a lot of cool stuff that will be happening there. In addition to that, I want to make sure people understand we are not stopping investment in the core product. There is a lot of new innovation and improvements to the core product that have nothing to do with AI that we are absolutely committed to improving. You saw just a few of these in our recent release at Max. We added 2 new adjustment layers, temperature and tint, long-standing, asks from the community like, hey, I would love to be able to change the color or the temperature and tint and not have to go into Adobe Camera Raw. There's more coming. So there's lots of improvements to selections. There's big improvements to the performance of Photoshop and the stability of being a really, really stable product. So we're we're very committed to building out the core product itself, as well as using AI to accelerate and add new capabilities.
Awesome. Well, Stephen, this has been so amazing. I super appreciate you giving us your time, which I'm sure is not easy for you to break away from your tasks there at Adobe. Last question, who's someone you would recommend our listeners learn more about or we could have here on the podcast? Maybe someone at Adobe or elsewhere that you find inspiring.
Well, we talked quite a bit about CAI, or the Content Authenticity Initiative. So I would probably recommend Andy Parsons, who leads the Content Authenticity Initiative at Adobe. He's a pioneer in this area, much more able to talk about the technical details than I am, and also has just a great vision for this technology and how we can solve the transparency problem. So that's who I would recommend.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Stephen. This was awesome.
Yeah. Thanks, Matt.
Yep. Well, before you go, I want to say this clearly. This podcast exists because of Patreon. Patreon is how this show stays independent. It's how I'm able to have long, thoughtful conversations like this one, support guests, create bonus episodes, and experiment with ideas that don't fit neatly into an algorithm or a sponsor's agenda. When you join Patreon, you're not just supporting the show financially. You're joining a community of photographers who care about craft, ethics, curiosity, and doing meaningful work. You get access to bonus conversations, behind-the-scenes discussions, community threads, and a direct line into the ideas shaping the podcast. If this episode resonated with you, or if this show has helped you think differently about photography, or feel less alone in the process, Patreon is going to be the best way to help to keep it going. You can join for free or become a paid supporter. Either way, it genuinely matters to me. Thanks for stopping in, collaborating with us, and listening. See you next week.